You're listening to the Parents of Hardworking Teens podcast, episode 55. Why critical reflections are an absolute golden opportunity, in my opinion, to boost marks, not just in that reflection, but also in the major assignment piece itself. Stay tuned to hear how. I'm Katie Jones, and with over 15 years in education as an award-winning high school teacher, international external examiner, and as a study coach, I've helped thousands of students skyrocket their results and confidence. And this podcast is where I share all my insights, tactics, and tips with you, the parent, so you can help your hardworking teen get happy, smart, and successful in their study, and have you both enjoy the journey along the way. This is the Parents of Hardworking Teens podcast. Hey there, very important parents. I hope you're doing really well. I hope your week is going fantastically. If you listened to last week's episode, you probably know what I'm going to start out with here today. Yes, it's an update on the podcast downloads. And yes, we crossed 10,000 downloads on the podcast. We are up to 10,142 downloads as I record this. And I say we because this is down to you downloading, sharing, rating and reviewing, as well as me for recording them. So I really want to give a big shout out to everyone who's shared the podcast with friends and family or left a rating and review. I do know that it takes a conscious decision to do it. I know it only takes a few seconds, but the decision to do it is the key. And I want to acknowledge that. And I really appreciate you doing it. And it's not too late to do that if you haven't already. It would be awesome if you did. And I also want to publicly say a massive thank you to all of you who are long-time listeners who have been a real part of that 10,000. And to anyone who's just found me and this podcast, a big welcome to you. I hope you enjoy going back through the 50 plus episodes and finding the insights and tips and strategies that are going to most help you to support your teen in their study and the goals that they want to achieve in that. And so for today, a bit of a segue from the numbers on the podcast stats to numbers on your teen's report card or their assessment mark. There's a particular type of task that I especially want to focus on and help with today, and that is those critical reflections. These are the small, but not at all insignificant tasks that your teen might be set alongside or right after a bigger assessment. Because I know that a lot of students do sometimes treat these as just a little bit of an add-on. They don't necessarily give it as much energy or effort as they could or, in my opinion, should. Because a reflection is a relatively, compared to the big assessment, short piece of writing that your teen does that reflects on and justifies or explains or critiques the main task that they have just written, that they have just completed. So it's not a reflection on another text or some other source that someone else has written or painted or created, but it's a reflection on their own work, a critique of their own writing, an explanation of their own writing. So one example that I've seen a few times is a reflection on a narrative. So your teen writes the narrative or the short story, and they then write a reflection that explains and justifies what they wrote, how they wrote it, why they wrote it that way. And specifically, they have to explain and analyze the choices that they made. So it's a very meta task. They're writing about their writing, but it's not actually that hard. But that doesn't mean they should scrimp on it because it has, in my opinion, a double whammy opportunity that I will explain to you on this episode. So if you can't already tell, I really, really like these tasks. And there are not that many tasks that I say that about. Because honestly, I do really think that every opportunity should see these as an opportunity rather than just an extra piece of work. It is an extra piece of work, but it doesn't need to be that difficult. I believe it's relatively easy to get an excellent mark. And as I said, I keep saying that word opportunity because it's an opportunity for them to possibly scoop up more marks on their actual main piece of writing, that original assessment that they are reflecting on. Because the reflection that they write means that the marker can see the thought and the reasoning and the meaning within what they originally wrote in that big task. It's like, for once, the marker actually gets to see and understand all of the effort and thought that went into something because the student now gets to write about it and tell them. Because you know, as a parent, those times when your teen has spent hours and hours and hours on a task and you just wish that the marker knew what they had truly put into it. And with a reflection, they do get to tell them. Not that they're going to write and tell them, hey, I spent 6 hours on this. Or for some students, I know it's more like 16 hours. But by explaining the devices and the techniques and the features that they've used and the decisions behind them, especially those that maybe weren't quite so hit someone over the head obvious, they do get to then share at least some of that. So here are the 2 reasons why I really like reflections. And I'll also then share a few practical how-tos on how your team can optimize these to really benefit from them. So reason number 1 is that knowing that they have to write a reflection, just knowing that that's coming afterwards, forces your teen to make much more strategic and meaningful decisions about what they're writing, how they're writing it, what they're including, what the intention is behind it, which means that they need to properly plan the writing in the first place. And that is always a good thing. I am such an advocate of planning any kind of large assessment, big extended response, or even an extended response exam question. So your teen should always be planning any extended response. So for example, if I'm using that example of a narrative, it's really going to encourage them to do the right groundwork, putting the right planning to produce a higher quality narrative. So that's the structure, the content, the devices, the techniques, how that narrative is meeting the specific requirements of the task that they've been set, and how they're meeting the specific requirements of that task. Now, the extra bonus to planning in this case, as well as the usual benefits of having a clear, well-structured, higher quality final piece that is also then easier and faster to write, the extra bonus is that the plan is now almost like a resource that they can use to base their reflection on. So the reflection is also now going to be clear and high quality and easier to write as well. Because the intentionality that goes in behind a plan or into a plan, what is written, in what way and why, is basically what's required in the reflection. They have to say, here's what I wrote, here's in what way and why. They have to justify it. They have to analyze in their reflection. So reason number 1 is that it encourages more planning, more strategic decisions, and those create a higher quality piece of writing for that main task. And number 2 is that there may well be some things that went into that piece of writing, into the original task, that the marker wouldn't necessarily be aware of if it wasn't explicitly explained. And I actually had a real example of this a few years ago when I was coaching a student on their narrative for English. And the main character's name that they had chosen had a special meaning. Now, it was a foreign name and the story was about a migrant. So I just thought the student had chosen a name randomly from that country. They'd gone and Googled names from that country and chosen one. I had no idea that the name actually meant something. But when I read their reflection, I realized that they had intentionally chosen that name to add to the theme or the message of the story. Now, I wish I could remember what it actually was to be able to share it with you, but it was about 3 or 4 years ago now. But it was something like, I don't know, it was like the name of a flower, which was there to represent growth and life. Or It was a word that meant freedom in the other language. It was something like that. And it was therefore a strategic decision by the student in their original narrative that would then count as a narrative device or as characterization. It was symbolic, and that carries marks in that original task. So not only could that explanation and analysis get marks in the reflection itself, it might also have boosted marks in the actual narrative assessment, as the teacher then knew about that element in the story, something they might not necessarily have picked up without that reflection. So those are my two reasons. And now let's just consider, if they are so important, if they can bring these big boosts to marks, how does your teen go about writing a crazy good critical reflection? Now, a reminder, I am not an English specialist teacher. I do often see these reflections accompanying English tasks, but I also see them a lot in other subjects too, especially in the arts subjects like dance and drama, visual art, photography, because these are where students are justifying and explaining their artistic choices. Because your teen needs to write this reflection like they would for any other analytical extended response. So they write it like they would if they were analyzing a short story written by a different author, or if they were analyzing a dance from a professional choreographer, because that's exactly what a critical reflection is. It's an analysis of a text, of an artwork, or of a performance. It's just that it's not Shakespeare's text or Picasso's artwork, it's theirs. So just like any other analytical piece, they need to identify their evidence. So it would be what specific devices or techniques or features that they have used, and they explain and analyze those. Now, how long the reflection is, so what their word limit is, or how long they're given if it's under time conditions, is going to determine how many pieces of evidence or how many features they are going to analyze. But they do need to discuss a range of them. So if we're considering that narrative task, then they're going to want to choose a variety of types of techniques. So they would need to choose evidence across aesthetics and structure and language. Now, like I said, I'm no English expert, but hopefully you get the idea of what I'm getting at here. They ideally want to also have them from across the text, so something from the beginning, the middle, and the end. This is discerning selection of evidence. And your teen wants to strategically select which features in their writing or in their piece they're going to analyze in order to show a range of skills, yes, but also, importantly, they also want to select ones that show how they met the requirements of the original task. So maybe they had to write that narrative about a particular theme. So they would be best off selecting devices and features and techniques that relate in some way to that theme or how they've brought across a certain message in their writing. So that way they can explain those links and they can justify how they've used certain devices or techniques in relation to the original task requirements. This is where they get those extra boosts. They get more bang for buck. They get those double whammy benefits when they can optimize their writing in this way. So hopefully you can now see even more so why it's important that they have a clear and detailed plan to start with when they set out on the original task. Because if they just made these things up as they went, then yes, they can still justify their choices. They can still explain their features or techniques, but it's going to be harder to analyze them in relation to the overall purpose of the piece. And it's doing that which will raise their mark in the reflection and increase the likelihood that they might also pick up some additional marks on that original piece. So I hope that this persuades you and your teen that although a reflection is an extra thing to do, it's actually an awesome opportunity to boost their marks. And I hope it also gives some extra clarity on how to write that reflection. And I also hope it's an extra bit of persuasion for your teen to be planning that original extended task and also planning the reflection, what with it also being an extended response in itself too. Have a great rest of your day. Have a wonderful week ahead, and I will see you back here next week. If you're ready to have your teen achieve their best possible results with less stress, then I want to invite you to enroll them in the 10-week Grade Transformation Program, where they're going to learn the key concepts, skills, and strategies to catapult their performance in assessments and exams. It's risk-free. They either achieve bigger and better results with a whole lot more confidence in 10 weeks, or we refund you in full. Just head over to www.rocksolidstudy.com/program, and I'll see you there.